talk about why one of President Trump's most recent executive orders is not a hashtag Muslim ban, as everybody's calling it, as it in fact is not a ban. What is a ban? A ban is the complete cessation of the income of something, whatever the hell that is. I mean, let's just get on some common ground. So, ban. Officially or legally prohibit, an official or legal prohibition, or apparently a curse. A ban on soliciting. He was banned from driving for a year. Okay, so now we've got some context for ban, if you didn't already have that before. Sorry if I'm sounding a little snarky. That's because this is fucking stupid. Calling this a ban is fucking stupid. It is not a ban on Muslims. It is, if anything, a ban on the income of certain immigrants from certain parts of the world. And it's not even a ban because people are in fact allowed in. They are not completely prohibited from coming in. When there was prohibition of alcohol, what happened if you had alcohol? You got in trouble. There weren't certain people who were allowed to have alcohol and certain people who weren't. Anybody could get in trouble. They were all subject to the same law. That is a ban. This is not a ban, and let's look at why. So if we roll down to subsection C of this executive order, it says to temporarily reduce investigative burdens on relevant agencies during the review period described in subsection A. So you can go through and read this yourself to look at subsection A. Trump basically explains the issues behind letting just anybody come into our country from certain parts of the world, and how there is a historical backdrop of issues and violence from these people that we're trying to address. But let's get to the more relevant subsection here. C, to temporarily reduce the investigative burden. What does that mean? Well, you should already know, but if you don't, it means this is hard work. Vetting people who come from the Middle East is very hard work. It takes a lot of resources to track down where these people came from, who their associations were, and what their motives might be. For instance, the last couple of I was gonna say days, but really it's been hours for me. I've been seeing all this shit about 2 refugees being held up in the airport. Well, guess what? Their family's already in the state. They aren't held up in the airport like he is. The 2 military-trained males, the 2 military-trained translators, who may very well be perfectly reasonable individuals, but the fact of the matter is that they're military-trained males from the Middle East. And it may not even be that they were radicalized, but what if they have some family members back in the Middle East that are being held hostage? They could be forced to do certain things. You don't know. And that's why they're taking the time to look at these guys thoroughly and make sure something like that isn't the case, that they don't have some sort of blackmail leverage against them. But anyway, back on point. I'm just all over the place on this because it is very frustrating to see something like this blown out of proportion the way it is. So, subsection C, what does this say? This says to help give our agencies a chance to get a jump start on this extreme vetting, we're going to give them 90 days. Where does that say that? 90 days. Not 120, not forever, 90 days from the date of this order being executed. So they get 90 days where we're going to suspend the entry from immigrants and non-immigrants. And here's the kicker. This is why it's not a ban. This is what I was talking about before. Excluding those foreign nationals traveling on diplomatic visas, North Atlantic Treaty Organizations visas, C2 visas, G1, G2, G3, G4 visas. This is why it's not a ban. Okay? During Prohibition, which is by definition a ban, we looked at that earlier, nobody could have alcohol within the United States. Nobody. It wasn't that, people with certain licenses could have alcohol. Obviously, it could be used in the medical setting for sterilization, but you can't drink isopropyl alcohol. It will kill you. So that's entirely different. This is not a ban because there are exceptions. There are exceptions. If there are exceptions, it cannot be a ban by definition. This is not a ban. If you keep calling it a ban, then you are continuing to just mire yourself in ignorance. And really, you're not doing anybody any favors. All right, so before we were talking about, let's see, what was it? Subsection C. Let's move down just a little bit further to subsection G, which is just as goddamn important and defeats the idea that this is a ban. So, what does G say? Notwithstanding a suspension pursuant to subsection C of this section or pursuant to a presidential proclamation described in subsection E of this section. Okay, let's skip through that. Okay, here we go. Secretaries of State and Homeland Security may, on a case-by-case basis and when in the national interest, issue visas or other immigration benefits to nationals of countries for which visas and benefits are otherwise blocked. So again, what is this providing? Exceptions. What cannot exist if a ban is truly what we're dealing with? Exceptions. There cannot be exceptions if this is a genuine ban. It's not. This is exactly what Trump promised during his campaign. Extreme vetting. This is just the very beginning. And like any other extreme project, a little bit of a conservative approach is warranted at the beginning. We're dealing with a flood. You can't just drop a wall in front of a flood. It'll get washed away. You need to create a foundation. And especially when we're not attempting to stop a flood. If anything, we're attempting to create this little, to analogize it, metaphorically speaking, we're dealing with a canal. We're trying to control the flow of water entirely. We're trying to control the flow of immigration entirely. But this is just one more reason why it's not a ban. It can't be a ban if on a case-by-case basis we can allow people in. If anything, this is what we should have been doing in the first place, on a case-by-case basis. If you're a member of a club, do you not, take a look at prospective members? Do you not want the best membership? That is part of what makes America great. At the beginning, we were attracting a lot of great people on a case-by-case basis because they saw opportunity here, and the USA was about seeing opportunity and seizing it. So, when you've been looking at the immigration issues being sparked after this executive order, you've probably seen people throwing this whole 120-day marker around that earlier I shot down, because it's not. It's 90 days. This is where the 120-day myth comes from. Right here, Section 5. It's talking about the realignment of the U.S. refugee admissions program for the fiscal year of 2017. Yes, this is Trump actually talking about bringing the U.S. refugee admissions program back, not getting rid of it, not putting up all sorts of bans like people are worried about. So what does this say? What does Section 5 say? During the 120-day period, the Secretary of State, in conjunction with the Secretary of Homeland Security and in consultation with the Director of National Intelligence, shall review the U.S. refugee admissions program application and adjudication process to determine what additional procedures should be taken to ensure that those approved for refugee admission do not pose a threat to the security and welfare of the United States. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. That sounds pretty reasonable as far as the purpose of this is concerned, to ensure that those approved don't mean us harm. I guess I was naive to think that anybody was ever doing that beforehand, but man, that would have been nice, don't you think? However, the two subsections we've talked about before, the two that preceded Section 5, prove that there is not a 120-day ban. There is a 90-day temporary reprieve, if you will. But even during that reprieve, people are still allowed in on a case-by-case basis. And this is what we're seeing with these two Iraqi refugees that are stuck in an airport, stuck in limbo, as the mainstream media will have you believe. It's because they're currently being assessed on a case-by-case basis. That's perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. You can look it up yourself as far as our military operations in the Middle East. Were there many of heroic, or at the very least very useful and loyal translators? Yeah, there were plenty of them, but there were almost as many that were double agents. But there were plenty of double agents. They were just as prevalent as anybody who was good at their job, if not more, depending on what part of Iraq or Afghanistan you were working in. If you don't believe me, look it up. If you're too lazy to look it up, well, then fuck you. You're stupid. Just like if you think this is a Muslim ban, then you're fucking stupid. And that's just the way it is. Bans do not have exceptions. Bans do not have case-by-case inclusions. That's just not how it works. A ban is a ban. This is just taking control of the faucet. That's all it is. That's all it is. And if you can't understand that, well, get the fuck out of the way and let the adults get to work.